Hey guys, Naz here. So today I thought I'd take you through everything that's going to be going into Crash, or at least what I think is going to be going into him. So I've been working on him for about 3 weeks now. I'm hoping that I'll have him done in about another 6 weeks or so, give or take. It's going along pretty well, actually, a bit faster than I thought it would. So here I have a whole bunch of references that I found for Crash in this new software that I found. It's called PureRef. It's free. I'd really recommend it. It's sort of like a little window that you can drag and drop all your references into. You can make it so the background is transparent. You can make it so that it sits on top of the program that you're working on. So if you're drawing, you can have all your references just there. But it's just a really good place to store your references. So I knew that I was going to be making Crash for at least about 6 months. I've known for a fair while now. And he is a massive project. He's life size, so he's going to be about 5 foot tall. I'm only 5'5", so he's nearly as big as I am. So I knew that he would be not only physically large, but he would be a huge project just because of all the details that are going into him. So I've really had time to sort of mull over everything, just looked at a ton of references and thinking over in my head how I'm going to do everything. So now that I'm at the point of actually doing it, I'm pretty confident I know all the steps that are going to go into him. So first off, I found as many references as I could, which was quite difficult because they don't sort of show really good references of him, you know, straight T-pose front, straight T-pose back in the game. There's not a whole lot of cutscenes in this game for some reason. So there's not a lot to work off of, and when he is sort of running side scroller or front to back in the game, it's always at an angle and it's always quite far away. So it was quite tricky to find sort of highly detailed references of him. So I've gone around and a lot of them I found as pictures on gaming websites that were talking about the game. For some reason they got really high res photos of Crash to use as like their header images. I also went and found the highest definition playthrough videos I could. There were some trailer videos that had some sort of like different animations for him that I could find different references from. So over those 6 months I've just been gathering and gathering references. These aren't all of them, they're just the ones that I'm using right now. So I knew that I was going to be making him mostly out of EVA foam. Because I'm going to be making his mouth kind of like this massive open cavern mouth, I knew that it would be nearly impossible to make that out of plush, and also his body is such a strange shape. I knew if I made that out of plush, for one, it would be super heavy and he probably wouldn't be able to stand up by himself unless you bolted his shoes into the floor or something like that. Also, it would take a really long time to make this sort of strange head body shape out of plush. So I decided that I would go with foam. It would be lighter, it would be quicker, it would be more accurate. And since I was going with faux fur to cover him, you wouldn't really see the details of the foam underneath because that fur will be nice and plush and will cover up those details. After collecting his references, I sort of started gathering the different materials that I would need, but I'll talk about that later. The first thing that I started working on was his shoes. I wanted to start on something sort of work from the ground up. A lot of Anthro characters that I've made, I have started the shoes first as just a nice little bit to get out of the way, and they sort of set up the scale for the rest of the plush. So I couldn't find a perfect side ref for Crash, so I ended up making my own. I sort of mishmashed a bunch of references that I'd found that kind of show his side view to try and get an idea of his size. So I brought him into this Photoshop document that I made. I made it exactly 60 inches with a little bit extra, but to sort of scale him. So he's to scale in this very large Photoshop document. So I can go, okay, his torso needs to be this height, his pants need to be roughly this height, his shoes need to be blah blah across. So I worked out that the soles of his shoes were going to be about 17 inches across, which is really, really big. So I started off by making the soles of the shoes, which was the first thing that I did because I knew I wanted to 3D print them. They have this sort of neat detail underneath. I'll see if I can find a shot of them. They have sort of like this hex pattern underneath. So I wanted to 3D print the soles of the shoes, which I have done. and then I wanted to, sand and prep all of them and then make a mold and cast them out of silicone rubber, so they sort of have that rubbery feeling like the soles of shoes would. Looking back, I kind of wish I hadn't promised that, because it's very expensive to make molds that big, even though I'm going to be making them hollow on the inside. I think it will be really awesome, but it would have been easier just to 3D print the soles of the shoes and that'd be it. But I've bought all the materials, so I may as well use them. It will look quite cool. So this is the best references of the shoes I found. It's sort of out of a trailer and he's like tapping his feet to the beat of the music. So anyway, I got a trial version of Fusion 360. You can have this program for free if you are a hobbyist or you earn under a certain amount, which is fantastic for me because I didn't hit that threshold. And the first thing that I modelled was the sole of the shoe. So I ended up finding a reference, I don't think it's in here, it's of him running and he sort of has the shoe kicked up because he's running like really exaggerated, and you can see the front of the shoe. It's not a perfect reference, but it was enough for me to sort of work out the shape of the shoe when I knew that it was going to be 17 inches from front to back. This is an old version of this shoe because it doesn't have the little channel running around it. But anyway, I went to school for animation and I pretty much left knowing absolutely nothing about modelling. I think I went really too young. I was really just overwhelmed by the whole progress of university. If I'd known a little bit more about what I was doing, I probably would have come away with a lot more. So I really haven't touched a modelling software in a really long time. I may as well be a beginner for all that I know or all that I remember. It's been a long time now. But I used Fusion 360 is great for modelling geometric kind of things. So I essentially started out with, I traced the overall outline of the shoe, I expanded it upwards, I sketched out all these little hex patterns and used them to sort of indent into the main shoe shape. I think is it a bevel or a chamfer? I sort of smoothed off the edges of the shoe here and here all around, and then I made like a little noodle shape and I used that to dig out the sort of trench where that red line is going to go. So I started 3D printing this, and it took a really long time, even making it pretty much totally hollow because it was such a big piece. So here's half of one side of the shoe. So I had to print 4 pieces about this size, so I couldn't print the whole shoe in one go. My printer's not that large. I was lucky to be able to fit this larger piece on my printer bed. But each of these took about 4 to 5 days. And that just took a really, really long time, as well as when I was going on to the last print, we had a series of storms. And with 3D printing, if your power cuts out on your printer, you can't just turn it back on and start where the printer stopped. You have to pretty much start all over again, or you can chop, go back into your program, guess where it stopped, chop your model in half and then start printing the rest of the model, which I had to do on one of the last pieces. It's kind of a nightmare. Having the power go off almost every single night, it was a real pain. But anyway, I got those printed, I got the sides glued together, and I'm still working on, I've been using filler primer, lots of sanding, some filler to just try and make it look like a seamless, smooth shape. So then the next thing that I did was I sculpted the shoe shape out of clay. So here you can see the whole shoe printed, that's one half of them, that's both of them done. I needed to print off a little cap there, but you can see the seam. It's taking a lot of work to sort of clean that seam up. Anyway, yeah, so here I ended up, because before I printed the bottom of the shoes large, I printed a version, I think it was quarter scale, of the shoe sole just to make sure that the shape and everything would print out right. So I had this quarter scale sole, so I thought instead of 3D modelling the shoe, I wasn't too confident with the software yet, that I would just go ahead and use a monster clay, reusable clay, to make the shape of the shoe on top of the sole. So I did that, and then I ended up covering it in cling wrap and extracting the pattern, which gave me the foam pattern for the shoe, which was really awesome. So you can see here the 3D print is hollow on the inside. I'll be moulding all of that. And then I made it out of EVA foam. So the foam that I was using, I think I used about 7mm foam, EVA foam for these shoes. I wanted them to be quite sturdy, didn't want to go so thick that I wouldn't get those curves and shapes in there. But I was extremely happy with how it replicated the shape onto the shoe. It pretty much was an exact match for the original sculpt. You can see here me marking out where I think the seams are going to be and all the little join marks, etc. So for the shoe parts that I haven't done yet, I have 3D printed out the eyelets, and I made molds of them and cast about 20 of them because he has 16 eyelets in total on both of his shoes. Turns out I should have waited till I had progressed more on the shoes because I made them too big. So I have these big eyelets sitting around that I have no use for, and the molds for them, which is kind of a pain, a little bit of waste of material, but not the end of the world because they weren't huge pieces. So I'm going to wait till I have finished more of the shoes, and then I'm going to re-3D print small eyelets and make molds of those and cast them. The reasons that I made molds of them instead of 3D printing all 16 of them, which wouldn't be too bad, it'd probably take like a day of printing to print all of them. When you print out, your prints are quite rough. They have the 3D lines visible, so all the layer lines visible on them, and you want sort of a smooth finish for your finished part. It takes a really long time to use primer and then sand, primer then sand, and then I ended up doing a layer of resin on the top to make sure that it was perfectly smooth. But doing that on the one eyelet that I ended up making all those molds out of, that took a couple of hours. It wasn't a quick process, so it would take days for me to manually sand all those 3D prints, so it's easier for me just to make a master, make a perfectly polished, really smooth one, then make a mold. I ended up making 4 small molds so that I only had to cast out 4 times in a quick set. I think it's a urethane resin, but just to the standard resin, sort of, I think it's called Easy Cast here in Australia. I also found a shoelace sort of look-alike. I think it was made for like bag edging or something like that, like beach bags, but it looks exactly like these laces here, are quite large, pretty much giant shoelaces. I also found a fabric. It's kind of like a cord fabric that I'll end up dyeing. Luckily I could find it in sort of this pale sort of rose pink colour. So I'll just be dyeing it using polyester dye to match these sort of ruby kind of colours that he has in his shoes. I find that a lot of the merch on him has his shoes as like bright, like fire engine red. When you play the games, they're really not that colour, they're kind of this like duller ruby kind of colour. So I hope I'm not just imagining things, but that's what it looks like to me, so that's what I will go ahead with. They obviously look more bright red in the sunset because that's got like that yellow tint to it, but his shoes are more of a dull kind of colour. So I've been making the shoes. Here's the eyelets that I did a test print out of thinking that they were the right size. They're too big. I should have done the rest of the shoe detailing before I printed those. Here you can see the shoelace, sort of fake shoelace material that I found. So here's me making both of the shoes. It's really easy to replicate once you've got that pattern down. EVA foam, contact cement, cut, cut, cut. Certain parts are cut with a bevel, so all this line up here, both sides have a bevel so that they meet at a nice sharp point. Here's me sanding the shoes, making the eyelets that I ended up not using. Here we go, so here's me detailing the shoes. So this took about a day. Really just a repeat process of making the initial shoe pattern. So I just taped on top of one of the shoes half, drew on where I wanted this sort of additional layer, and then cut and glued that out of, I think, 2 or 3mm EVA foam. I had that lying around. I've used that for things like eyelashes before. I like to use that foam for. That's a really thin EVA foam, but I just wanted to have it in different layers. I also used my heat gun to sort of heat it up and form it against the shoe because it didn't want to sort of sit really nice and neat and flush. So I'm going to be pretty much skinning the different areas of the shoe in that cord kind of fabric. But I did end up ordering 2 kinds of blue real board short fabric, so I can't remember what it's called. I just googled board short fabric and it came up. so you could actually wear these in the surf sort of thing, and you'd have no problem. But really I'm just going to be making a board short pattern. Hopefully that won't be too tricky. Shorts are pretty easy to make. I think it'll just be a bit of trial and error, but I bought a lot of board short fabric because it's really expensive to ship to Australia. So I thought I'm going to get enough, because if I get it here and then I run out while I'm pattern making, I'm going to die, because the shipping was like, I think just for the swatches alone, which were in a letter, it cost me something like $50 or $60 to get that to Australia, which was just ridiculous. And that was mostly because the seller didn't want to ship to Australia, so I had to use a transshipper because for some reason they didn't want to ship internationally, which was a bit of a pain. But anyway, long story short, I got the colours that match his board short fabric, and I've got another sort of smaller lace material that I will probably be using to make this little sort of tie on his shorts here. So on the topic of how big he is, because he's so large, and because I don't want my commissioner to have to pay like $4,000 to ship him all in one piece, we decided to make him be able to disassemble. So he's going to disassemble pretty much at his board short line. So all this is going to be connected, and then there's going to be joints that will connect his upper half to his lower half. Also his arms and ears are going to have to come on and off. The arms are going to connect with PVC joints to be nice and strong, and the ears are going to connect with some very strong magnets. Just because with his width, the ears were going to push him over the limit of what I can post with just standard postage. I will probably also make his mohawk magnetised as well, just so I can take that off during shipping and put that back on. So I'm going to be making his armature out of PVC, which is what I use typically for giant plush, things like life-size ponies and stuff like that. It's incredibly strong, it's really light, you can buy all sorts of different joints for it. I don't know if you guys call it PVC in the States. If you search PVC pipe, it will probably come up, but it's just like a plumber's pipe, white plumbing pipe. But it's really strong, you can get it at any hardware store, which is convenient for me because my boyfriend works at a hardware store, so it's really easy for me to get that sort of thing. Also, there will be bits of plywood, which is just a thin wooden board that I'll be cutting out to sort of reinforce where he's going to join together, especially between the torso and his legs, so it's a nice sort of flush joint. So I finished 3D printing his shoes. The next thing I wanted to go on to was 3D modelling his body. I could have done this out of clay, which is what I would have done if I didn't have my printer, so I decided to sculpt it out digitally, and that would give me a lot more flexibility. I could have everything symmetrical, it would be a lot faster than sculpting it manually out of clay. I could also overlay reference images in this software, things like that. So Crash has an extremely strange anatomy. I think I said earlier once that it's kind of like someone, took a head, made it large, shoved it into a torso, and then cut the head off the top. Like, it's very strange. It's sort of like head and body all merged into one. There's no neck. It's like kind of like a walking head. But anyway, very, very strange shape. I wanted to make sure I understood it before I started translating it into 3D space. So I think I spent maybe 4 or 5 days working on this sculpt. I'm using ZBrush Core. ZBrush is sort of an organic sculpting program. So what you can do in ZBrush, it's essentially kind of like working with clay. So it felt sort of very organic, like you can see, you can sort of draw on things like it's clay, you can dig them out, you can smooth everything out quite easily. But anyway, I purchased this software, I think it was $180, which is pretty good. So this is just the core version of the software. I think the full version is like $900. But this is all I need for now. You can use almost all the tools. You just don't have access to the super advanced stuff, which I don't really know how to use anyway. But I modelled this whole thing out. Started off with the torso, doing the face, cutting out the mouth, just doing rough sculpts of the teeth. I'll need to refine those later because I'm going to 3D print those. I ended up sculpting the rough shape of the legs, the ears, and the arms, hands, etc. So this is pretty much the whole model. What else have I got? I've got the tongue, I've got the eyes. And then I did like rough eyebrows. The eyes I'm going to change. I ended up doing sort of previs on how I'd like the eyes to look different, so I'll change the models and end up printing those eyes out. But anyway, you can see a rough idea of how he's going to look in 3D shape. You can turn perspective on and off in the program. So yeah, I ended up, I think over a weekend I printed this model out, excluding the nose, the teeth, the tongue, but I just separated, because he's such a huge piece, I separated the pants from the torso, I separated the ears, the arms, etc., so that I could extract the pattern from him. And it made it much easier that I was doing this in foam rather than plushing. This shape with this mouth would have been a nightmare to make out of a plush, so it was much easier to make out of that EVA foam. So let's see if I've got... Yeah, so here is the torso pattern, the head torso pattern, without the tongue, the teeth, the nose, the ears, etc. Very strange shape, but you can see how sculpting this out before I started really would help. It sort of helped me understand that strange shape and not be too put off by it when I'm extracting the pattern and building the base form. You might not think that he looks this strange shape, but that is what he is in his underlying form. So I wanted to replicate that. So I just taped straight onto the 3D model. I only taped half of it. You can see I've marked on where I want my seams to be, little reference key points to line up when I'm gluing the foam. I cut all the pieces off him. There was something ridiculous like 36 or 37 pieces for just this portion of him, of the foam. So while I would say it's easier than spending weeks and weeks making a Minky pattern, it's still not easy. You still have to manually cut every single piece of foam, you have to scan every single piece, draw over it, make sure you've got everything exactly scanned in and printed out. I think it took me a day just to print out the pieces, cut them out of the foam. Ended up using, I got a little bandsaw for my birthday, which is just a saw with a blade that sort of rotates around and you sort of have access to one portion of it, which is perfect for cutting foam. I ended up using 10mm EVA foam, which is quite thick. I wasn't sure if it would be too thick, but it ended up being just right. I wanted him to be really sturdy because this is a huge shape. So I started off just by doing the torso, and this week I've been doing all the other parts of him, so his arms, his legs, his ears, just doing the same process. So I'm 3D printing out all of these parts, putting tape on them, extracting the patterns, etc., etc. So here is the torso all glued together, except for I hadn't done the inner mouth cavity, which sort of straightens up this side here. It's sort of bending down under its own weight at the moment. So I just used a kind of contact cement that you can get from any hardware store. In the US it's called Barge. Here in Australia I use a brand called Sika, S-I-K-A. But anyway, that pretty much permanently bonds all these EVA foam pieces together. If you try to pull them apart once it's dry, you're going to rip the foam in half if you're very strong. But you can see how well it replicated the shape of the original sculpt. It's pretty much spot on. The only thing that I had to really work on was you have to heat the EVA foam up with a heat gun and sort of press things into the back of it to sort of smooth out those seams and get them all rounder shapes. But you know, apart from that, it was pretty much perfect, so I'm super happy with that process. This is how big he is. You can sort of see how large he is when you compare him to my face. I made his shorts separately out of the EVA foam. So I did the original 3D print, but because I guess of my inexperience using the program, it wasn't perfect. So I just edited it a tiny bit using clay, and then I taped up that side and used that to make the shorts pattern. It was quite funny. I wish they were a little bit larger. Crash's torso is probably only like 15 to 20 centimeters wide compared to his massive body. I wish that his torso was wider because I could actually get into this, these shorts and his torso because it's hollow. If his torso wasn't so tiny, maybe you could fit like a tiny child in there. That would be pretty funny. But anyway, I've worked on making his arms. With his hands, I did try to make them out of foam, but then decided that that was just a waste of time because it was so fiddly trying to pattern all the fingers and glue all the fingers together and all that sort of thing. So I just ended up making his hands out of plush. I'll attach that to the foam. It's all going to get skinned with fur anyway, so this will just be a soft sort of core for the hands. I'll also put armature in them so that you can pose his fingers, which is, I think, nicer than having them sort of static in that sort of T-pose hand shape sort of thing. So the parts I haven't done yet, I obviously have to skin him all in the fur. So I've bought a teddy style fur from AliExpress. It's like a sort of an ivory colour. I'm going to be dyeing it this yellow and then this pale orange, because pale orange in shorter fur in this colour doesn't exist. So I will probably film me attempting to dye that fur. I've got all the dyes here ready. And then once he's skinned, I'll be sort of skinning him like a fursuit. If you want to look up how to fur a fursuit head, you'll probably find videos of people going through that process. For his sort of fleshy mouth, I'm going to be using fleece. I would like to use silicone, but I think making a mould that big, it would just be insanely huge. I don't even know if I could do it, and it would probably cost like thousands of dollars for me to make a mould and cast something that large. So he's going to get some nice dyed fleece in this pink colour, and that'll sort of be a nice sort of skin texture, like a uniform soft pink. I could have used Minky, but I'm leaning away from that because I really don't like how with Minky, the second you touch it, this surface kind of becomes messed up and it doesn't look like smooth anymore. So I wanted to use the fleece here. I'll do some airbrushing around the edge to sort of blend it in with the fur colour. So for the inside of his mouth, I'll be airbrushing that sort of that reddy colour around the edges and then black to sort of make it look more cavernous. I've done that on things before, like Trico's ears. I sort of made his ears look like they had a deep hole inside them, whereas it was just a small hole, and I airbrushed black into the base. So I'll be doing that same sort of thing with his mouth once it's all lined with fleece. I'm going to be 3D printing his teeth, which I'll then sand down and coat with resin and then glue those in place. His tongue I will probably be making out of silicone, so I'll need a mould. I'll make a sculpture of the tongue, probably laid out flat, make a mould and try and cast it out of hollow silicone. I've watched videos on people doing that before. I'll see how I go. But I want to make his tongue really long so that you can have it sticking out, but then probably cut like something like a hole in the base of his mouth so that you can like feed the tongue back in, so it's only looking kind of like this. So you can sort of pose the tongue a little bit. So yeah, I'll try and cast that out of silicone so it looks like a real tongue, and then sort of airbrush it to have sort of all the different little colours and textures that are on his tongue. For his nose, I'll probably mould cast that out of silicone, so I'll probably 3D print his nose shape and then put clay on top of it, and then mould and cast that out of silicone, try and make it hollow and then fill it in with foam or something like that. For his eyes, they're going to be 3D printed. I'm going to have magnets on the back of them, and I'm going to try and have them removable via magnets. I really want to make at least one interchangeable eye so that he can sort of have this look here, so his, one pupil is usually bigger than the other one with Crash. So have one where he's looking straight ahead, and then have one sort of derp so he can have this like crazy face. So I'll be doing that with the 3D print, so sanding it all off, painting on the little pupils and then covering that with resin. For his hair, I'm probably going to either go with hair wefts. I always forget how to say it, Kekleon or something like that. I can never pronounce it, I can never remember. If you look up Casplay's tutorials, she uses it. I'm going to be doing that for the eyebrows as well, using hair wefts and sort of making them onto probably a foam base and gluing them on for the eyebrows. I would like to make some sort of mechanism. I don't know if you guys have seen Crash does this funny little eyebrow wiggle where his eyebrows go up and down. So I want to try and make some sort of system where his eyebrows can like wiggle up and down if you like maybe press something in his hair, like a little lever, so you can wiggle his eyebrows. So that's my plan so far. And what else have I covered? His ears will just be the same, they'll be furred and then airbrush that sort of black in the middle to make them look deeper than they actually are. They're not super deep, but in some lighting, like the super harsh shadow and I think like black shading they put in them sometimes makes them look really deep. His gloves, I think, are the only thing I haven't talked about. I'm going to be making those out of EVA foam, thin EVA foam, and then I'm going to be painting them to look like leather, sort of putting in some heat press details, making those look like leather. But I think that's pretty much it. He's going to be getting, all his fur will be getting airbrushed because I want the natural tone variation in his fur. You can see, especially on his back, he has like patches of pale orange, and then he sort of has pale orange, you know, parts of his arms and like parts of his face, and then it goes into darker oranges in places. So I'm going to be dyeing the fur like this pale pastel orange and then airbrushing the darker oranges on him where necessary. So he sort of he's not just this flat orange, which would kind of make him look fake. He definitely has a lot of variation in the oranges on him. But I think that's pretty much it. As I mentioned, huge project. I mean, kudos to you if you've bothered to listen to this whole thing, because just talking about how I'm making him is a long process, let alone actually doing all of it. But he's coming along really well, everything's going to plan. Really just a matter of trying to work out what order to do things, because a lot of his pieces need to be sort of interlocking and play off of each other. Like I need the board shorts to be flush with the fur, so I need to fur before I make the board shorts, and I need his armature to connect into the shoes, but I need, you know, there's just all different things that need to interact with each other, and I'm worried about doing them in the wrong order, like installing magnets and then maybe they're in the wrong spot or things like that. So that's kind of the difficulty at the moment, is working out which bit do I tackle next. So as I showed you guys, this is pretty much where he is up to now. So this is him here, and then he's got his arms. So next week I'm going to be building his armature so that he can stand as a single piece. So his shoes will connect to his legs, which will connect to his board shorts. Then there'll be the joint section, which will connect up here, and then his arms will have joints, blah, 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 blah. But essentially finishing all the armature so that he stands all in one piece. I can make sure that all the foam work is correct. I can make sure all his anatomy interlocks fine. And then I'll work out what the next step is. It'll probably be skinning. A lot of the foam will be covered in fleece before I cover it in fur. I did this when I made Trico. I don't know if I have. Let's see if I can find a picture. So originally when I made Trico, I carved him, he obviously had his armature, then I carved him out of foam, but then rather than just putting his feathers or his fur straight onto the raw foam, I ended up sort of skinning him in like a fleecy kind of felty material just to smooth everything out. It sort of gets rid of the bumps and lumps on that base foam. So I'm probably going to do the same with Crash, and that's going to sort of smooth everything out before I attach that final felt and fur, because there are still some sort of sharper edges on the foam currently. So I really want to just have everything super smooth. I'll probably get my Dremel with the sanding bit and just come in and re-smooth all of the seams just a little bit, all the ones that are sort of poking out, fill in any sort of areas that I want to have more bulk with fleece and hot glue. And then I'll probably work on starting to dye all the custom fabrics that he's going to need. So I'm going to have to dye all these ruby colours for the shoes. I'm going to have to dye the fleece for his mouth. I'm going to have to dye all the fur for his body, which I'll have to probably pattern before I dye because it's going to be really bulky. I'll only want to dye the amount that I really need. So after his armature's done, I'll probably, if all his anatomy works together, if everything's scaled correctly, I'll probably start on finishing his shoes first. Just get that out of the way because they're sort of on their way to being finished. Make the moulds of the base of the soles, cast those out, dye all the shoe fabric, skin all the shoe pieces, glue them all together, 3D print the eyelets, mould the eyelets, cast the eyelets, paint the eyelets, add the laces, finish it all off. Then I will probably work on making, as I mentioned, smoothing out all the pieces of his torso, arms, etc. Then making the fur pattern, dyeing and skinning his face, or like, it sounds horrible skinning his face, but like making a skin on his face with the fleece, dyeing the fur, adding the fur. Once I know the final width of him, I'll use that to make the board short pattern. Then I'll probably work on 3D printing all the parts for his eyes, his teeth, his nose, then do the pattern for his hands, start making all his hair, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm hoping that I can get him done before Christmas. That would be really nice. But he's just such a massive project, really big project. But anyway, I've rambled on for long enough. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you want me to make a video covering any aspects of what I've talked about, what I'm going to be doing, send me a private message, because I really want to know what you guys want to see covered. I have sort of a rough idea of covering a couple of things in videos, but I'm not 100% sure yet. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the thought process that is going into making this guy.